Okay, so we're going to talk just a little bit about Aviation New Zealand, who we are for a start, a little bit about UAVNZ, one of our newest organisation, and then just run through that sort of agenda. So Aviation New Zealand, just a few figures up there. We are the Aviation Industry Association, one of the major aviation associations in New Zealand. So 119, 137, 141, all that sort of stuff. You don't need to know what it all means. It's all aviation terms, but it does show that we have a significant proportion of the New Zealand industry belonging to us. We have around about 250 financial members and well over 1,000, including stakeholders, on our database. We are obviously an industry association, so we work quite closely with industry, but we also have quite a strong role working in with government. And there is a one government aviation group, which is Ministry of Transport, CAA, Foreign Affairs and Trade, NZTE, Callaghan. And we work very closely with them in particular, and it's all about aligning what we do for the ultimate benefit of New Zealand. So Aviation New Zealand, we have a number of major divisions. New Zealand Helicopter Association, New Zealand Agricultural Aviation Association, ANZ. We have training and development, which has not gone the route of having its own logo, but it's all about the training research scene in New Zealand. And then in December last year, UAVNZ was created. There was quite a bit of talk in the lead up to its creation, and really the decision on the part of a number of UAV companies that it should sit with Aviation New Zealand. So UAVNZ in an informal state had been doing quite a bit of work but wanted to base itself somewhere. So they are now with us. So UAVNZ, what does it do? It's all about connecting, it's all about promoting UAV companies and services, and it's all about supporting companies. So one of the first things that's coming through this environment is focus, yes, on commercial operators of UAVs, drones. That's where UAVNZ is strongly positioned. And we are looking at developing a number of operating guidelines for the professional operators of UAVs, the commercial operators. We see ultimately that a number of those guidelines will just flow down on into the other users of UAVs. So the man on the street, the using toys, and in that environment we work very closely with Model Flying New Zealand, which already has quite a strong involvement in the model flying area in New Zealand. So the big challenge, this is aviation as we know it at the moment. It's a very highly regulated industry, and it covers manned flight, because just about everything in airspace at the moment is manned. And it's all generally powered apart from gliders which are operating in here. So that's really the situation that we have come from. And we are going into something that is quite different. We're now talking unmanned flight. We're now talking unmanned flight and manned flight sharing airspace, sharing the same airspace, operating safely, not having collisions. UAVs operating at that very high level, 20,000 metres and up, all in the telecommunications area, are not going to have much impact on a number of things. But it's the UAVs that are operating at 150 metres and below that are going to really come into conflict with manned flight, which is where a lot of the New Zealand helicopter operations fly. It's where a lot of the agricultural aviation operations fly. So there's a feeling and there's a nervousness in industry about UAVs coming into this airspace where up until quite recently there's only been manned flight operating. And we're going to see lots of new applications arising over the next few years for UAVs in this lower level airspace. And we're talking UAVs from that size up into, well over 15 kgs. So there's quite a range of size. And I guess the wild card in here, around about 4,000 metres, is some of the talking that Amazon is doing and delivering small freight consignments, and that's probably the level that they will operate at. And again, that's going to come into conflict with manned flight. So it's the development of rules are critically important to ensure the safety of aviation. And Sam will talk a little bit about what's going on in that area. So at a macro level, the global UAV market is currently worth around about $6 billion US. It's forecast to grow to over $12 billion within the next 10 years. A lot of the growth is occurring in the US, in the UK, Europe, Israel, but there's also quite a bit of growth occurring in New Zealand. And why should that be so? Well, just as our terrain was ideally suited for the early adoption of aviation, New Zealand was a really early adopter of aviation. Long, narrow country, difficult to get roads and decent rail systems through. So aviation became the saviour. And that terrain is also ideally suited for UAV operations. And we see the economic impact of UAV operations becoming involved in some of our leading industries as being quite significant and able to introduce a number of productivity changes and improvements. We have a number of companies operating in the UAV space already, either as developers of UAVs or as suppliers of technology, the software systems that make UAVs more effective. We also have a very engaged regulator. And that's critically important because you don't achieve anything in the whole aviation space unless you are working very closely with the regulator. And the regulator is, in return, working very closely with industry. We want to make the future happen sooner rather than later. And at the end of the day, while there is one aircraft per 1,000 people in New Zealand, and there's something like one aircraft per 1.2 million people in India, our airspace is still quite uncluttered. So there is lots of room for UAVs and manned flight to operate together. Callaghan Innovation, and I'm using a few Callaghan Innovation slides because they've had a really significant role in encouraging the development of UAVs in New Zealand. And they completed some research earlier this year which was suggesting using UAVs could save us or could generate between $150 and $190 million worth of increased economic activity each year. And clearly we can see UAVs being used in films, we can see them being used in power line inspections, just as two examples. We can see them being used in disaster situations, getting into places where it's just simply not safe for people to get into. Inspections on the underside of bridges. Again, you can do it by foot and binoculars, but a UAV can do it very, very effectively. And that's just an example of some of the inspections that are capable on bridges where we probably don't notice things that are happening, but through a UAV we can, and you can take remedial maintenance action. So we're doing things before they break rather than when they are broken, and also in agriculture. So clearly there's a challenge here for the manned flight industry, because the manned flight industry has been doing a number of these things already. And I think the interesting challenge is going to be how can a number of existing operators incorporate UAVs in their product offerings and provide more comprehensive services, more cost-effective services. So who else is involved in this whole UAV scene? Well, there's lots and lots of conversations going on. So clearly a number of government agencies are involved in this space. And as I said, Callaghan Innovation was very involved in the early development of UAVNZ. Airways has been very involved in the development of AirShare, which is a website that encourages safe UAV operations. And it's a really good site. If you're looking for something that's quite stimulating and actually provides a lot of the answers, it's a good place to go. But we're also, and we've seen in the media, lots of other questions coming up through the use of UAVs. We've had some contact already with the Privacy Commission on privacy issues that are arising. We know that Service IQ is currently involved in developing some training programs for safe use of UAVs. We'd like to think that all of that is happening in consultation with industry and reflecting the UAVs that will occur, but we're still really waiting to see what happens in that area. Now, I just there like to show AirCare, because maybe it's a guide to what all of these agencies working together could do. AirCare is something that was developed by Aviation New Zealand and CAA. So again, the close relationship with CAA. And what is AirCare about? Well, it's an accreditation program. It's an accreditation program. You have to comply with a number of processes and procedures to become accredited to it. So it's an integrated program for aviation businesses. It brings flight safety, environmental safety, and other safety-related functions together in one safety assurance program. So rather than companies needing to comply with the regulatory requirements of a number of different agencies, a number of those requirements have all been incorporated within AirCare, and it goes for AirCare accreditation, and then it meets the requirements of a number of the regulatory agencies. So we see this as potentially a way to go. And then if that's possible, going back to one of those earlier comments about UAVNZ and developing smart operational templates. So we know privacy is going to be an issue. What about developing something through UAVNZ, the Privacy Commission, CAA, the police, that puts all of their requirements around privacy together in one simple one-page, two-page document, and then we co-brand, and that becomes the norm for the industry. Now, I think there's a number of things that we can and will be doing that we're not currently doing, but that will improve the whole environment for safety. So Richard Pearce flew in 1903, 1904 in something that looks pretty unsophisticated. I think we're going to be seeing some very, very sophisticated UAVs capable of doing much, much more than was ever envisaged 110 years ago.
Hi, I'm Sam. So I'm in the legal team at the CAA, and it puts me in a good position because I can obviously, I've been involved with the policy team throughout the development of some new rules around RPAS. And also I provide advice to some of our operational guys hiding down the back about day-to-day RPAS related issues. And so I should just say early on that I'm going to be referring to drones as RPAS because that's the term that the CAA has adopted. That's namely because drones basically kill people, usually in a military capacity. So remotely piloted aircraft systems, or RPAS for short, is what we use. RPAS obviously are presenting a number of challenges, and I'm going to talk to you just very briefly about, I guess, some of the challenges that we're experiencing and some of the challenges we are seeing. So obviously John talked about the huge growth in RPAS use and the uptake of RPAS technology. And I guess one of the key challenges for us is that the uptake is by people other than seasoned aviators. So we're talking about people who are walking into a Dick Smith and buying a $300 RPAS, through to business-minded people who see an opportunity in the market and think this would be a great idea to get into this. So a new group of aviation participants who aren't familiar with what is effectively a very structured and complex system. We've obviously got some significant safety challenges, and that mostly comes from airspace use and integration with manned aviation. And I guess the other key challenges that we've got very innovative Kiwi. So the increasing applications that RPAS are being used for are just so varied. I think in 1 week we received up to 80 inquiries around different RPAS activities and asking for advice on all the different types of uses and applications. So the types of things that we're being approached about with questions around using RPAS to deliver items. We've got RPAS that are a small, sub 1 kg, through to aircraft that are effectively the size of a manned aircraft. We've got increasing use by other government agencies like police and enforcement agencies and other companies using it for power line inspection. Those kinds of applications that perhaps a manned aviator can't actually do, so the use of an RPAS is actually creating safety benefits because it's doing tasks that would be otherwise too dangerous for manned aircraft to do. Obviously, the CAA is a safety and security regulator. That's our mandate. So we're concerned about safety of people on the ground and in the air. And our rules are directed at effectively identifying the hazards and then managing risk associated with those hazards. And so in the RPAS context, the key risks for us are obviously RPAS flying into people, RPAS flying into other aircraft, and then RPAS flying into objects, and then the downstream impact that can have. And that can be things like, obviously, a fire started from a crashed RPAS. And we've had some feedback from agencies such as DOC, for example, about how concerned they are about RPAS being used above DOC land and the potential for fires in remote and sensitive areas. So the types of reports that we're getting, the types of occurrences, the types of incidents that we're seeing are obviously in the safety space. So we're talking about hazardous flying, low flying, airspace incursion, flying at night. And to a large extent, these are the same sorts of issues that we're seeing in the manned space. So, but to a greater extent, one of the issues with RPAS is that unlike manned aircraft, which is a closed system, so we know who's operating in the system. We usually, obviously with manned aircraft, they are registered. People have to have a pilot's license. So effectively we know who people are, what they're doing, and where they are, and the types of use that they're using the aircraft for. It's not so much in the RPAS space. And that's something that obviously over the next few years is going to become quite a key discussion, is improving that traceability. What steps can we take to know who is operating within the system? Another issue that we do have in the safety space is that people are increasingly coming to us and saying, there's a person operating an RPAS outside, I want to stop them right now. Or how do I stop them right now? Part of our problem is that with our legislation, it's very reactive. So it sort of links to that traceability point. Usually we can identify an operator and take steps to either educate or enforce. But with RPAS, the powers that we have under our legislation it's difficult to take that immediate action that people are increasingly expecting in the RPAS scenarios. But we are seeing a new, along with the sort of the traditional group of safety concerns, we're also having issues reported to us that either have multi sort of heads to them, or perhaps so in these spaces like nuisance, or including noise complaints, privacy, harassment, and other people complaining about people using RPAS for criminal purposes. the main one being peeping and peering into someone's window or flying around in someone's backyard. These issues obviously present a major challenge for us, because as a safety and security regulator, our mandate is very is obviously on safety, and so when we receive a complaint about something that has one of these components to it, that's obviously very difficult for us as a regulator to manage. And so one of the things that one of the projects underway is to increasingly work with the Privacy Commissioner and also the police around developing some sort of protocol or some guidelines around dealing with these types of issues. And particularly for police, it's particularly important for police because police are increasingly becoming a sort of a first responder to RPAS-related incidents. So there's a need for the CAA to educate and provide that guidance to police. I've just listed some recent examples we've had of where the types of complaints that we are getting, where that's not just a safety issue, there's some other components to it. So obviously just recently with Anzac Day, we had multiple queries about people operating RPAS above parades. And so the complaints were in the nature of obviously flying above people. There was a safety risk that the RPAS could hit those people. But equally there was complaints about that they were being a nuisance, that the noise was interrupting the service. Obviously there was some photography being taken of people, and so sort of a mixed bag of feedback and complaints around Anzac Day services. We've also had a recent example of where there was a house fire, and a person well known to police decided to take his RPAS up and fly it immediately above the house on fire to get some really good images to sell to news media. And obviously the fire service were concerned about that because they were potentially exposed their staff to some risk. Same with a forest fire. We had there were around 4 helicopters operating to put out a forest fire, and obviously the presence of an RPAS taking some images was interrupting with the fire operation. So we've had near misses with commercial aircraft operating at very, very high levels. We've had examples of a chap who wants to do coffee delivery in the Gisborne CBD. You might have seen some footage on Campbell Live, I think it was, with the RPAS crashing on the footpath right next to the person being interviewed. We've had, and this is just one of an example, one of this type of situation. We've had people complain to us about people operating drones basically in their backyard. They look out the window, there's a drone hovering outside their window, and in this particular case, it was a young girl sleeping in her room and the RPAS was looking in with a camera. We've also had examples with people annoying wildlife, so buzzing over seals, and DOC has given us some good examples of where there's certain restricted areas where people can't obviously land on certain, with their boat on certain islands, but they're going there with an RPAS and hovering above a seal at half a metre. So it sort of gives you an idea of the types of occurrences that we're seeing and the difficulties and the number of agencies that can potentially be involved. But it's not just about the naughty RPAS operators, it's also about people on the ground reacting badly to RPAS operations. And we have had, and Jonathan can probably confirm this, we've had emails to our general email box with people asking, can I shoot drones down? And I guess so how people react to drones is also a challenge for us because we're increasingly having to educate the public about what is and what isn't permitted. Privacy is obviously a big part of that, and often our strategy is to pass them on to the Privacy Commissioner, but sometimes it's not so easy. As I say, sometimes it's not quite easy to decipher what the person is actually complaining about, because it might have those multiple heads. And I've just got a quick video because even monkeys react badly to drones. Legitimate expectation of privacy there in his enclosure, and along comes a drone. I think the drone comes off second best. And board. So I guess we've got a number of tools in the toolbox. I was talking about how often these issues and these occurrences can have multiple agencies potentially involved. So obviously where it's a safety issue, it's easier for us to deal with because we can apply the civil aviation legislation that we have. And there are a number of rule offences and act offences that can apply. I was talking about the situation of the RPAS looking into someone's window with the young girl. There are obviously a number of criminal charges that are also possible to respond to RPAS-related incidents. But the range of activity that people engage in and the range of issues or the range of things that people are doing, it's not quite clear exactly where, outside the Civil Aviation Act, the appropriate response to some of these things. So obviously that's a key thing for CAA to work with police on how best to respond to RPAS-related incidents. And obviously another tool is a complaint to the Privacy Commissioner. So all of these sort of challenges added to a picture that our current rule set is not fit for purpose. That's because the current rules are very much directed at model aircraft. Basically the rule puts a limit on, a weight limit on model aircraft of 25 kg, which means that currently most RPAS that are being flown around are under that weight limit, so they're caught by the model aircraft rules. And they're really not workable. We initiated, in July 2014, we initiated a rules project. It was a two-phase rules project, the first phase being on effectively upgrading the existing rule and creating a new certification rule. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And then phase two is a sort of a longer term project around looking to establish a comprehensive rule framework that is about the full integration of RPAS into the civil aviation system. And we're very much going to be guided by ICAO, which is the International Organisation for Aviation, and watching what other jurisdictions are doing in this space. And there's a key reason for that is that obviously New Zealand, given its size, we really want to tap into the expertise in ICAO and other jurisdictions to see what direction they're going. And for example, in Australia, I think they were one of the first jurisdictions to introduce rules, and they're basically going through a process now where they're ditching what they're doing and going in a completely different direction. So because it's such a rapidly growing environment, we really are we're not a leader but a close follower, which is having a lot of benefit for us. So the new rules. So these come into force on the 1st of August this year. And so there's two rule parts. So existing part 101, and really what the rule has done there is tidied it up and so made it more fit for purpose to capture those RPAS operations. And then part 102 is a new certification rule which is is designed to deal with those operators who want to operate outside the operating rules under 101. So for example, under 101, an RPAS operator can't fly at night. So 102 is designed to allow that operator to come to the CA and say, this is what I want to do with my operation. And then there are a number of expectations and standards that they have to meet. So they have to basically satisfy us that how they're going to manage the risk, what mitigations they've got in place. I'm not going to go through the rules in detail, but this is a particularly important one because it's related. I guess it affords some privacy protections and it deals with some of those challenges we talked about earlier on. So there's a new airspace rule that basically requires people to obtain consent from anyone that they want to fly an ARPAS above, or a property owner or a person occupying a property if they want to fly over that space. Now, the consent that's actually required in a particular case may vary. For example, we're expecting that we're engaging with local government New Zealand about how they're going to manage this particular rule in terms of public spaces and public parks. And it could be, for example, that a local council might say ARPAS activities are permitted everywhere except Park X, Y, Z. There are some exceptions to this rule, and I won't bore you in the detail with that, but basically there is some areas of airspace called danger zones that can be designated by the CAA. And so if a person's operating in a danger zone, then these requirements don't apply. And also if someone obtains that Part 102 certificate that I talked about, then we would engage with the operator to understand why it's not practical to obtain consent in a particular case. So why did we introduce this consent requirement? Well, it's really about awareness of the person on the ground. So, we contemplated an engagement between the ARPAS operator and the person that's going to be affected by the operation. And so this was about a transfer of knowledge. So a transfer of knowledge from the operator to the person affected, saying, I want to operate an ARPAS above your property or on your farm. And it gives the landowner, for example, an opportunity to say, well, actually there are a number of risks you need to be aware of. For example, in the farm example, it may be that a farmer has engaged an agricultural operator to come and do some spraying. So there may be a helicopter operating at 20 feet or 50 feet off the ground. And a farmer will also know about any wire hazards, that kind of thing. So what we were really trying to achieve is that exchange of information and that engagement, because we think it's critical to these lower risk operations under 101, where effectively the CA doesn't know that that person exists. And it's also because under 101, the aircraft, they're not subject to the same airworthiness standards that manned aircraft go through. So the potential for them to have mid-air failure or a data link failure, that kind of thing, it's just so much higher. So it's about creating a safety buffer. So how will this consent rule assist with non-safety issues? So obviously it puts the person on the ground in a position of control, because they are able to have that awareness and knowledge, so they can either remove themselves from a situation where an ARPAS is operating, say I don't want to be around this or under this, or if, in the case of a landowner, it gives them some control to say, actually no, I don't want this ARPAS operating above me because I've got 5 kids playing around in the backyard and the risk is too great. I think with this consent rule, I mean, there's a fair bit of water to go under the bridge. I mean, it's, as I said, this rule is part of phase 1. It's an interim approach, and it may be that we have to review the effectiveness of the rule further down the track. So where next? Well, we're busy implementing the new rule. A lot of internal stuff going on, a fair bit of stakeholder engagement. Key for us is an education and communications program, setting up internal registers and information, producing information and guidance for industry. And I guess particularly important for today's discussion is that new relationships and protocols. So that's about, as I say, developing those relationships with police and the Privacy Commissioner to be really clear about our expectations of one another and how we're going to deal with these increasingly challenging issues. And an enforcement strategy. I guess that's key, is that obviously the CA is going to want to take a very phased approach to enforcing the new rules. Our focus is very much going to be on educating those, particularly those non-aviators, so that we bring people into compliance rather than hit them with a big stick, at least initially. Obviously there's a fair bit of work also going on to progress that phase 2, and we're monitoring international developments. I talked about education, and I guess it's key to the success of our regulation and the new rule in the RPAS sector. And our major challenge is connecting with those non-aviators. With Callaghan Innovation and Aviation New Zealand and Airways, we've developed the AirShare website, and that provides a lot of basic information for, I guess, those non-traditional aviators. And it's also a really good resource for them and us, in that people can log their flights on the website. So it gives us a feel for what kind of activity is going on out there, who people are, the extent of use, all of that data that we don't really have at the moment, because the RPAS sector is different to the manned sector. But we're more than open to ideas for increasing our outreach and sort of delivering that education. So if you've got any fantastic ideas from your agencies, we would love to hear them. Happy to take some questions. So the question was, the new rule around consent, is that effectively going to close off RPAS use in urban areas? Yes, but for example, if someone's operating in their own backyard or in a park where the council said yes, you can do that, then that's going to be fine. But of course the consent rule also allows someone to go and knock on their neighbour's door and say, or a person's door and say, can I operate above your property? So the default position is yes, because we're effectively trying to close down that activity without that transfer of knowledge and that awareness of people who are going to be affected by the operation.
So is there going to be any say, city councils or lines companies that aren't going to be affected? So if they want to check the power lines that run through people's properties,
yep,
do they have to individually go and seek permission of each?
Generally the case with power line companies, it's our experience that they already have all of those arrangements in place with landowners. So in that type of situation, they're already operating, for example, helicopters up and down those lines. We expect that those types of operators also will come into the new 102 certification rule. So in that space, we may say that it's simply not practical for them to go and seek consent from every single landowner. It may be that they just need to put a notice in the paper or do a leaflet drop or something. So it will always depend on the circumstances, and particularly with a lines inspection operation, the aircraft that they're using as well, we would expect it to meet, I guess, a higher airworthiness standard. So the possibility of it having a mid-air failure is probably much lower than sort of that $300 RPAS off the shelf from Dick Smith. The question was, do we have any idea about the uptake of RPAS and how many are being bought in every year? The answer is no, we don't. One of the things we have done, though, and I can give you some, sorry, I meant to mention in my presentation, was the orange flyer that you've been all handed out. We sent 15,000 of those to Hong Kong to be included with distributors of RPAS coming into New Zealand. So, yeah, we really don't have an idea of number. We can, yeah. So sorry, no. And that's one of the issues is that that we really just don't know the extent of use and who's actually using them. Yeah.
So what's the story of someone complaining to CAA about a property?
Yep.
What's the sort of legal process?
At the moment, so we provide advice around what the rule situation is at the moment. So at the moment, as long as they're operating under 400 feet, they can fly above someone's property. But it depends on the nature of the complaint. For example, if they were complaining about flying at a low level, looking into the house, we would assess that and go, well, does this need to be referred on to the Privacy Commissioner? Do we need to provide this person with advice about, actually, we think the complaint's more in the nature of a privacy concern, or we take steps to say, is this person actually concerned that someone's been taking some photos or images of them in a sort of a covert, intimate way, and obviously we'd engage with police. So it's really sort of fact dependent. I mean, we're just getting so many different reports and complaints that it's just so fact specific, and we are spending a lot of time having to sort of assess each of those reports and say, well, is this a CAA jurisdiction, or is this police, or is this privacy? So that's a key challenge for us, and that's why we really want to develop that partnership with police and the Privacy Commissioner, so that we're quite clear on when we expect police, for example, to refer things to us, and when we would refer things to police. And we see that as a key relationship. So So the question was, will there be offences connected with the Rule 101 and 102 rules? Yep. So the answer to that is yes, and I believe that Parliamentary Council officers drafting the offence regulations at the moment, so they'll be there live from 1 August. So again, we as part of our engagement with police in particular, we want to talk to police about what role we see, I guess have that discussion with them about how they could potentially assist us to enforce those rules, but acknowledging that in most cases it's police that are the first responder to someone ringing up saying there's an RPAS in my backyard. So, yeah.
Do you mind if I just
Yeah.
Make a point too, because I think the last thing we want is for there to be lots and lots and lots of complaints, because everyone just collapses under the load of complaints. So as Sam said, education is the key thing. So while the rules come into force on 1 August, we actually need to be doing a lot of work in the meantime to make sure that operators of RPAS understand what they can and can't do. So there's a lot of proactive education has to occur.
Yeah, and it's not just education of RPAS operators, it's also the public. So in that situation where we've got a member of the public writing in complaining about an RPAS operation, that's an opportunity for us to say, well, these are the rules, this is this great website, airshare.co.nz, have a look at what they can and can't do. So we've also got a role in educating the public about what activities are permitted.
Is it too early to talk about penalties if a RPAS user is in breach in some way of one of the rules? I mean, when does that discussion happen?
So your question was, is it too early to talk about penalties in terms of breaches of 101, 102? So obviously the offence regulations will be in place from 1 August. But as I said around the where to next, one of the key things for CA is developing a sort of an RPAS specific enforcement approach, because we don't want to come out on day one and start prosecuting people. It's obviously we're going to take a very measured approach to educating and spreading the word about the new rules. And as I said, one of our challenges is connecting with those non-aviators and getting that communication out there. That's not to say that if at day one someone who's breaching the rules in a quite serious way, particularly if it resulted in injury or death, we've got the tools available to respond to that. I should actually just add as well that in the commercial operator space, so someone who's operating an RPAS for commercial purposes, they're likely to have obligations under the Health and Safety and Employment Act. So there's another tool there that we have, and we'll be monitoring their performance within that context as well. Our question is, what is the CAA going to look at providing guidance to people to establish give some guidance around establishing the height, the maximum height, which is 400 feet at the moment? The answer is yes. Jonathan in our policy team was nodding his head furiously. I'm not quite sure what that looks like, but Jonathan, can you help me? Yeah, so there's one of the things that we put out alongside the rule is a document called an advisory circular, and so that basically explains all the rules and what an acceptable means of compliance with that rule looks like. For a lot of these RPAs, they do have software that allows you to put maximum ceilings and that kind of thing in them. So, for example, if there was an investigation into an incident, we'd be able to look into software and that kind of stuff to see whether someone was actually used those types of inputs. But agree that that's obviously one of our challenges is particularly for operators of RPAs, the smaller, lower level RPAs is actually determining what 400 feet is quite difficult. I should just record that for manned aircraft, the minimum height that a manned aircraft can come to is 500 feet, unless it's landing or taking off. I think there's some other exceptions, but so effectively there's a 100-foot buffer between 400 feet and 500 feet, which is quite key to, at the moment, effectively separates manned aircraft from RPAS operations, with a few exceptions. So the question was about the use of RPAS in schools and their increasing use of them, and whether CA is looking to engage with the Ministry of Education. Probably the simple answer is we probably haven't thought about that yet. So I will take that away and pass that to Jonathan and the policy team, and he can.
I suspect within a few years you're going to have many more drones than
Yes. Yep. Yeah, and I think that's one of the opportunities for the industry at the moment is we've got organisations like Aviation New Zealand who are looking at training opportunities and putting together qualification programs where people will be able to obviously do these programs so that they're proficient in not only operating in RPAS but understanding the regulatory environment as well. Correct. Yep. So the question is whether presumably consent will be part of the engagement with a service provider, for example. So you're right, particularly probably in the real estate photography space, where people are putting up RPAS to take aerial photos of properties. It would be implicit in the contractual arrangements between the parties that person consents, obviously, to that if that's explained to them. So how that consent rule actually operates in practice, we're not necessarily contemplating written consent, signing on a piece of paper in every case. It's going to be fact dependent. So the question was, is there any distinction in the rules between RPAS and model aircraft and, sorry, I missed the last part of your question actually. Yep. So yes, the rule does retain some distinction, and particularly it places emphasis on where a person is operating an RPAS, which is effectively a model aircraft, as part of a club, for example, then some of the rules that would otherwise apply to an RPAS operator don't apply. So they're more relaxed because effectively what the CA is saying is that that person's operating within the framework of an organisation that has its own rules and own procedures and own sort of safety plans. They're generally restricted to a particular area. Model Flying New Zealand, for example, has a number of club sites where they've actually established danger zones. So yes, the rules are intended to sort of apply to model aircraft and RPAS across the board, but then there are a number of exceptions that allow, I guess, relaxed standards for model aircraft. Yeah. So the question is, if an RPAS is flying over a rural area, can someone shoot it down if consent hasn't been given? The answer is no. It's not something. I guess CAA would be concerned about people taking action against drones if that had a downstream impact. So if that aircraft, for example, impacted a person after being shot at, we would look to take action against the person on the ground, and we have a number of tools that we can use to do that. In terms of the damage to the RPAS, we'd be over to police for that one. But
I was actually thinking in terms of where stock are impacted. So if other people's dogs get onto a farm, you can shoot the dogs. If it's worrying stock or damaging, seconds around landing, and that's what I was thinking.
It's at the moment we're not really contemplating people shooting down RPAS, but maybe we need to think about that. Yeah.
Sorry, Sam.
No worries.
That drone hunter
Yes.
series, is that actually a whole series on YouTube?
I believe there are a number of videos on YouTube. Yeah.